And we are here live here on CMajor before the show. Thank you so much for listening on this Saturday morning. Thank you for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here this morning. And you know, this really is the first time that we've done this show live on a Saturday morning because we have been pre-taping the show just so we can get a chance to feel what it feels like to wake up this early on a Saturday to be with you. It's 6:45 in the morning here in the greater New York City area. It is raining outside. It is a dreary morning, so if you have your rain gear ready, then you will be ready when you step outside because it's still sprinkling out there. But I think it's going to clear up. But thank you so much for being with us this early in the morning. So we are live here on CMajor before the show. And I have a lot to talk about today. So I'm going to be talking a little bit off the cuff. I'm also going to be talking from script. I'm going to be reading a little bit from the books that I have in front of me. And I probably will play a few sounds on the piano just to further demonstrate my point. So thank you so much. And then if I have to take a break, I'm going to give you a music break and then I will come back. So it's Real Talk, Ragtime this morning here on this special episode of CMajor before the show. You're here with CMajor Porter, and if you listened at all to sometimes what we do, we try to give you a promo or some sort of announcement leading up to Saturday's show because I just like to do that. It seems like the thing to do rather than recording a full episode. So if you listen to one of the announcements that we made, the last thing that we said, and we really meant it from our hearts, was thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot that you are spending time listening to our podcast. We are going through a number of changes here on CMajor before the show. Sometimes we may have a 3-hour show or aim for a 3-hour show. Sometimes it may be a little bit less. It really depends on the topic. It really depends also on the time that I'm able to spend before I get on with my day of teaching piano lessons. So Saturday is a big music day for us here over at CMajor before the show. But let me just remind you what I said previously. And what I said was something about people tapping their feet in time to music. I said often people tap their feet in time when they are listening to a piece of music, especially if it is a march or a dance. They are tapping the steady beats of the music. You hear me talk a lot about on the show letter names of notes and self-teaching. Music is made out of fixed sounds like those produced by the keys on a keyboard. I am CMajor Porter, and I have something to say about making music. I invite you to tune in every Saturday morning right here on CMajor before the show. Today, we will talk about the emergence of ragtime music. Did you hear our Halloween episode? In case you missed it, it's still available for download or demand. And we also like you a latte here on CBTS. And to show you just how much, we are going to dedicate a short series to coffee culture and music. So start planning now. Start planning now to have your favorite coffee bar drink in hand when the time comes. And also, we will share piano lessons and stories, music tips, and more right here. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Also, tune in at the end of today's episode. I'm going to make a very special announcement, a shout out, a thank you to one of our listeners, one of our top listeners here on CMajor before the show. So let's get right to it. The emergence of ragtime is a very serious subject. So as I lower my music here, I just want to say how I'm going to approach it today. Because if I read straight out of the book, I may offend some people. Because there's a lot of talk about black versus white. And I want to make it inclusive if I can. And hopefully that doesn't offend someone. But I think here in the 21st century, when we all have an opportunity to learn about music making, all of us have the same opportunity to learn about music making, whether it's online, whether it's from a music professional. The playing field has definitely been leveled for everyone. Now, I think where the divide still comes, and this is my opinion, where I observe that the divide is still a divide, is what part of music do you self-teach? And what part of music do you work with a professional on? And it may be an appropriate reference, but I can't help but think about how it is when you work out at the gym. Either you want a personal trainer or you don't. And sometimes you just like to go at it by yourself and see results you can pull off for yourself. And other times you really need someone standing there just helping to guide you through the movements, even if it's something as simple as stretching your body properly. Do you want a 30-minute stretch? Do you want a 60-minute stretch? Do you want someone to really help you to prepare to work out? And I think that's what I'm starting to see a lot of, especially as I travel to students, the students that are able to have me travel to them. And sometimes it feels like they need my help, and sometimes it just feels like they don't need my help. So as I'm thinking through this, I'm stumbling a little bit because it really is, it's a thought process, and it's a wonder to me about the type of help that people need nowadays to do something like learn to play the piano. It's a want. It's not a need. No one needs to have someone standing there teaching them how to play the piano. So we're going to see a lot of that in what I'm about to read to you, because the emergence of ragtime came at a time in our history in America where these pianists didn't have someone to teach them how to play the piano. And very few of the ragtime pianists of this time did know how to read music. So what did they do, and how did they learn, and what is this all about? So again, I don't want to talk in terms of black and white right now. I really want to see if I can put in more general terms. But just stay with me. This is history, and I'm not trying to give you a history lesson. I really am trying to talk with you about how ragtime emerged, because it's a topic that I'm interested in. So not all composers in the United States at the time that ragtime was emerging, not all composers are writing in the styles of, and let me say it this way, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn. You get my point. Playing the piano is an 18th century idea. Do you agree with me? I hope you do. And while I'm thinking about it, please tune in a little bit later, because I'm going to be asking you, did you do your homework? Yes, I'm going to be over at CMajor's classroom a little bit later on this morning, and I'm going to post some things just in reference to today's show, because I still like to keep it light. I like to keep it fun as well as educational and entertaining, all of that. I really want to make this a fun podcast for you to listen to, for you to share with your friends. I know I have young and old listeners that are tuning into the podcast, and so I'm just really happy that you're here. But let's go back in time again to a time in the United States where composers were writing in the styles of the art music that was most prevalent. And that was the music of Beethoven and Mozart, Rachmaninoff. And so there were also large numbers of illiterate music makers that had not even heard of art music. Let's say it that way. And the reason why I don't want to assign it to a race is because sometimes you had music makers that were influenced more by one type of music over another. But I think I've read somewhere where somehow music just finds its way to just become this melting pot of sound. So that's why I want to stay away from just saying, oh, this type of music is assigned to one community over another. Now, you may find that if you read for yourself. Well, let's try to have a general conversation today. So, large numbers of musically illiterate music makers were not even aware of the music of Beethoven and Brahms and Bartók and Rachmaninoff and those people associated with art music, those composers. And many musicians, many music makers could not read music. And to be honest, they didn't even care. They were not concerned about reading music. All they were concerned about was, can I get the sound that I want? So I think that if you look back in time, you will see that one effect of the time was that there were some separate communities that were in place. That's just the way it was back then. But the beautiful thing about music making is that if you have something to express, you're going to find a way to express it. It's just going to come out. So imagine these music makers living in their own world and developing their own understanding of what music meant to them and their own understanding of culture and how music is born out of that. And so you have this music that developed a very distinctive style of entertaining. And a lot of it, and this is for anyone that writes music, sometimes, fortunately and unfortunately, your music making that you create fits your own personal needs. And it's also a signature of expressing your own individuality. So why I say that's fortunate and why I say it's unfortunate, because it's fortunate that you can do that if you have the talent to do that. But sometimes it feels unfortunate because if you play that music for someone, they may not understand it. And so therein lies the other issue. The music that you create for your own personal needs and for your own expression of your own individuality, does that music need to be analyzed? Does that music need to even be understood by the listener? Or does it just need to be listened to? I think that's the question. So ragtime was one of those styles of music that was very distinctive. And the other that you heard us talk about here on this podcast would be blues. And then later, jazz. So what I love about talking about ragtime music or rag music was that it was associated primarily with the piano. So again, the piano is an 18th century idea, if you think about it that way. So I was having this conversation with a parent. It was kind of a heartbreaking conversation because parents sometimes, they want to see their children play music that's popular, play music that's going to entertain their friends and family. And because sometimes parents aren't sure of the process of studying music. They just hear something and think, oh, that's easy. My child should be able to play that. So it sounds easy to them, a popular song on the radio, a rock song on whichever online music program you use, something that brings you back to your own ideas of what music making is all about. And now you have a child that has talent. Do you push that child to play what's popular? Or do you push that child to learn to play the instrument first and then go on to choose whether or not they're going to play something popular or continue with art music? So that's a big question, I think, in the minds of parents nowadays. Which part of music is more self-teaching, and which part of music requires a teacher? So again, from its beginnings, rag music was associated primarily with the piano. And so imagine, some communities had very little access to the piano. And you know what's interesting about that is that here in the 21st century, some communities still have very little access to the piano. Why is that? I've seen videos of them throwing pianos from a crane and crashing them to the ground into a million pieces. I've seen that. So the value of piano playing is in danger right now, I would say. Who really wants to learn to play the piano anymore? Why learn to play the piano when you can learn to play a keyboard? So that's for another episode. We will get to that. But just imagine, during this time, musicians who had little access to the piano, very little access to the piano, were also drawn to keyboard instruments. So, if you have access to a small organ, if you have access to a home that has a piano, then consider yourself lucky. But there were families that were trying to plan how they were going to purchase a keyboard during that time. Were they going to pay 50 cents down and 50 cents per week for a lifetime just to own a keyboard, just to have something to express themselves on? What were they going to do? And so, if you do want to go ahead and put it in historical context, I would go ahead and look up the autobiography called Up, and it's by Booker T. Washington. So go ahead and look into that, because I don't recall that Booker T. Washington was a musician, but I think he had something to say about music and music making and what the priorities should be when it comes to spending your money. So I would say historical figures like Mr. Washington, they may have been bothered naturally, seeing that some communities were putting together their coins, their dollars, to buy a keyboard, to buy an organ, when other things they could have been buying would have been better off, made them better off for their families. But I love this book that I'm reading from, because it does make you think, and that's what I said in the description of today's show, put on your thinking caps. Was that wrong to say that someone should not put their coins together to buy a musical instrument? Because sometimes when you do that, and I saw this a lot in music retail, it really came down to, am I going to eat tonight, or am I going to go buy this keyboard that's on sale? Am I going to sell my bass today, or am I going to keep this bass because it can help me get the next big gig? So if it comes down to a question of Am I going to eat? Am I going to have something to eat with? Or am I going to stick with an instrument that will allow myself to express myself so that I can eat? I think that the answer to that, and again, it's my opinion, is how you're using the music in your life. If you're using the music in your life so that you can get work, so that you can have something to put on the table, including tableware, then that's something to think about too. So this same issue was going on around the time that ragtime was emerging. So it sounds like to me music makers really had to make a choice, if to advance their music making or to advance their lives. And sometimes it was one and the same. So one of the first ways they showed their independence was to purchase the musical instruments, because it was a longing. If you heard the piano and you were drawn to it and you knew you had the talent to figure something out, to express yourself on it, then I'm sure you longed to have it. You thought, if I just had this piano, my life would be better. So if you think about the rag music players of the time, whether they were in the South or whether on the eastern parts of the United States, you would still find a piano in places that people would gather, and they were playing for tips. It was a job, and if you were a solo musician, then you found yourself playing the piano, providing music for listening or dancing. And I had to put on my thinking cap, because when I was in grad school, one of my professors said to us, he said, when you think about the way that music started in the United States, just think about the music that was being played. Think about the value of the music, and also think about how the music was being used. And for the first time, it really made me think, wow, music does have a function other than just for learning to play it. Because if you go to a music teacher and say, I would like to learn to play classical music, there's something about classical music that really just grips you. It really does. I can't even really explain it to this day. But I'm captured by it. I'm captured by looking at a piece of music from the 18th, 19th century, and sometimes even the 17th century, although, Bach didn't have access to a piano, but just being able to play what's on the page is just sometimes so satisfying. But then if you look deeper to find out how the music that you're playing for your own personal enjoyment, how that music was used, what was the function of that music, it really takes you down a different path, and then you start to realize, was this music provided for listening or something else? What was it provided for? So here we see in the latter part of the 1800s where music and music making is being used to provide jobs for people who needed jobs. So we can even take a place like Memphis, Tennessee in the 1890s, and we can think about how if you're walking down a very famous street in Memphis and you're hearing the sound of a piano, and then you look to see who's playing the piano, you may find yourself walking to a really, really deep story, and sometimes a dark story. But the fact is this: very few of the early ragtime piano players could read music. And that seemed to motivate them, I would say. I think if you just sat down to the piano and just started playing some sounds that were pleasing to you, or maybe you turned on one of your favorite recordings and tried to mimic what you heard, I think that it could be fun for music makers who have the ability to learn in that way. But some music makers learn best when someone is sitting there teaching them and talking to them about what they should do next. And some music makers learn best when there's something put in front of them to look at as they are playing. I think you have to think about that too. So as much as we're talking about a style of music, we're also talking about a style of learning. So the style of piano rag music was also called jig music. And it appears from what I'm reading that a lot of this music was used for, and what did I say at the opening? People often tap their feet in time when they're listening to a piece of music. So there was a lot of that going on, a lot of foot stomping of musicians as well as listeners when it came to piano rag music. And so now let's talk a little bit about how that music was made, because I'm reading from this book and they're talking about now the left hand is taking over the task of stomping and patting while the right hand is playing melodies. So is that really the case? In piano rag music, the left hand took over the task of stomping and patting while the right hand performed syncopated melodies. And I'm going to say more about that sentence in a moment, but let's talk about that because there's a lot in that sentence. The stomping, the patting, the syncopation. What does syncopated mean in the first place? So now I'm going to go over to my piano. Is it still on? Okay, you are hearing a sound coming from the digital instrument itself and not GarageBand. I don't have my GarageBand hooked up today. But it's saying here in the book that talks about blues and jazz that syncopation is the shifting of accents from strong expected beats in a measure to the weaker, less expected ones. And then I'm going to read in a moment from another book that talks about playing syncopated sounds, and I think you're going to be surprised at what they say about syncopation. And then there's something called syncopation improvisation. So I'm going to say a little bit about that in a moment as well. Now, I am not a ragtime player. I'll be the first one to tell you that. But there are many proficient ragtime players on the internet. All you have to do is just look around, do a search. You'll see them. They're all over. Also, we have an institution here in New York that is devoted to swing and jazz and blues. And I believe they have a ragtime professor on staff there as well. So someone who really, really knows how to swing. So again, syncopation. And I'm going to post this a little bit later over on my CMajor's classroom site over at WordPress. Syncopation is the shifting of accents from strong expected beats in a measure to the weaker, less expected ones. And that's curious to me. It's like, why are they less expected? But I think that's part of the style. That's part of the expression. This shifting creates a sense of surprise as the listener hears strong beats in unexpected places. So then my question is, well, why are they surprised? But that's the way you define it. You say, it creates a sense of surprise. Well, who's surprised? Maybe the listener is surprised. Maybe the player is surprised. Maybe it was an accident. But the shifting creates a sense of surprise as the listener hears strong beats in unexpected places. When this occurs, it helps to create the feeling of swinging which is so important to good jazz music. So that's the definition. I'm reading straight out of the book here that I have. And so if you have any questions about that, feel free to let me know you want to hear more about this resource. So here we are. We're going to take a little bit of an example from a C blues scale, and let's see what we can do. So what I'm supposed to do now is count and clap out loud, and I'm going to do that. So I'm going to count out loud and clap in 4/4 time. And I do want to say this. I know I have not talked much at all about time signatures over on this podcast, but you can meet me over at the CMajor radio show, and we're going to be talking more about time signatures over there. So I'll say a little bit more about what's coming up over there and what we've been talking about, just the number of weeks that we've been over at the CMajor radio show. But let me put down my microphone here for a moment. And so you're going to hear me clapping. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I did that completely wrong. What I'm supposed to do is clap on the end of 1 and not clap on 2 and not clap on 3 and 4 in the second measure. And then I'm not supposed to clap at all on counts 1, 2, 3, just on 4 and in the first measure. Okay, so let me try that again. So here I go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. So what bothered me about that is that I didn't say 2 and as it's seen here. I just said 2 and because it felt natural to say 2 and. But in the example, it says 2. So really what I'm supposed to do is say 1, 2, 3, then clap on 4 and then clap on 1 and. The and is tied to 2. And then not clap after that because we have a half rest. So let's try this one more time and see if I can get it. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, 3, 4. I think I got it that time. Okay, so hopefully you heard that accent that was in an unexpected place. And was it a surprise? I see what they're saying now because I felt surprised when I was clapping that. So imagine the surprise that I'm going to feel if I play an accent like that. Okay, so now let's put some notes to that. So the notes I'm going to put, okay, to what I just clapped will be that. But I have to say in the example that I clapped, the accent was not placed on beat 4 when I clapped it. But here, in the playing example, there's an accent on beat 4. So let me see if I can play the right hand part really quickly and play it correctly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, 3, 4. I think I did it. Now, let me follow that sequence. Let me follow that motive, rather. And then there's a sequence of rhythms. So let me play the next one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, 3, 4. Okay. Let me play another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Okay, so that was a little bit different. So as you can see, I am accenting certain notes over other notes. And I would need to practice this because it does create a surprise. And then, of course, I would need to add the bass line so that it gives it more swing feel. And put the accents in the right place. And try not to make this sound so crisp like I'm playing classical music. Okay, putting the accents in the right place. Okay, so that may not have been the best example of syncopation that I've played for you this morning, but it is an example and something for you to think about if you are interested in learning more about the emergence of ragtime. But there was that word, syncopated. So it's important to start to understand syncopated melodies and how syncopation works. Now I'm going to read from another textbook. So I love this because it gives you a more varied example, I should say. Because now we're going to see how syncopation was used in art music, not just in ragtime music and not just in something that can be assigned to communities that were singing spirituals. Let me say it that way. I am really trying to be politically correct, right? I have to laugh on that one. So, accenting a note which would normally be unaccented is called syncopation. So that's where the surprise comes from. That's where the surprise comes in, because it's just saying over here, the shifting creates a sense of surprise, but the reason it does is because normally you wouldn't accent that note. So syncopated rhythms are felt to go against a regular pattern of strong and weak beats, as indicated by the time signature, and they are easy to spot when they occur in vocal music. Now that's interesting. Syncopation or syncopated rhythms, syncopated melodies are easy to spot when they occur in vocal music. And so what I'm going to do now is try to play this example because it's from the opening of a spiritual. If I can just prop my book up here. Okay, so I'm going to put my microphone down again and see if I can do this. Okay. Okay, so that's a nice one because there are words assigned to this too. So if you can know where the words demand that the music will be accented. So in this case, we have a particular word. I'm not going to say what the word is, but it demands to be accented. So yet every time it occurs off the beat at a point in the bar, which would otherwise not have been stressed. Okay, so I like the way this book is really breaking it down to us. So I have another example of syncopation in vocal music. So let's see, this is not a spiritual. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, now I totally played that incorrectly. But if I played it again, I would put in more accents so that you can hear more of the syncopation. But you can definitely hear the melody line. So there are some accents. There's some accent signs. Sometimes you can put in a sforzando, which can add an element of surprise in music. So I think about sforzando, and we'll be talking about music terms a little bit later on the CMajor radio show this evening. So I hope you'll be able to tune in this evening for our live podcast episode over at the CMajor radio show. But the accent signs reinforce the syncopated effect. And if you are singing, then they're also going to produce, by coincidence, strong syllables with weak beats. And then you can associate certain words with that. And then they also create syncopations in the long melisma, as you can see here in the illustration. So I love this kind of talk because it's clear to me once you start putting the terms in place and really trying to talk about it from an art form perspective. Now we have another example. Let's see if I'm more successful with this one. But it's a following passage, and believe it or not, from Beethoven's Piano Sonata, one of his piano sonatas in the first movement, and it gives us an example of syncopation in instrumental music, which is my favorite. So I'm not going to play the bass line along with the melody and the treble clef, but let me see if I can just play it here, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more. Okay. So you can hear how the accent is on beats 2 and 4, which are normally weak. So it does give an element of syncopation. And then you have this rhythm going on in the left hand. So if I put the two together, you could probably hear that pretty clearly. So there's another example of syncopation. And I'm not going to read that, and I'm not going to play that. But if you play it, it's felt to be syncopated. And it does refer to Beethoven again. It does refer to Bartók on another page in this book. So I mentioned Bartók, I mentioned Beethoven a little bit earlier on this episode. So syncopation, and that's why I said I didn't really want to assign today's discussion to one music over another music, one community over another community. I just wanted to talk about it more in music terms, and hopefully you'll get something out of the discussion today. Okay, so how are we doing? Hopefully great. So I'm going to go back now. And talk more about ragtime. And then I'm going to come back and say something else about the syncopated improvisation that I wanted to touch on today. Syncopation improv. Okay, so where I left off, I was saying in piano rag music, the left hand took over the task of stomping and patting while the right hand performed syncopated melodies using motives. Now this is where it gets fun. Motives reminiscent of fiddle and banjo tunes. Now if you know anything about the history of the banjo, just think about that for a moment. It's a very fun history. And I can't help but thinking about a very famous comedian who is also very proficient at playing banjo. I think you know his name. He's performed with the Muppets, to give you a hint. So, just when rag music, this music developed by the music makers of the time, were for entertainment, just as it was emerging on the wider stage of American music, we don't really know when it started to come about. But see what I was saying before? How music becomes sort of a melting pot, because imagine if you're developing this thing called ragtime, and then at the same time you're influenced by the instrument that is not associated with ragtime necessarily, meaning a violin, a fiddle, a banjo. But whatever music was going on with the fiddle and the banjo, it's going to influence your development of the style too. Okay, so I will talk about regions. So let's talk about regions. And then again, you can form your own idea of the communities I'm talking about. But let's go down south for a moment. So in the South, piano playing started to develop, but only at a certain time. And then you started to see piano players such as Blind Tom and Blind Boone. And it's possible that even on the East Coast, particularly in New York, in Philadelphia, and Baltimore, that you had jig piano music that may have been played up here earlier than it was played in the South. So imagine that. Somehow the music has migrated down south, and then it's going to develop into it's going to emerge as a different way of entertaining for various reasons. So again, with the purchase of pianos for using in the home, and we're talking about the latter part of the 18th century, the earlier part of the 19th century. And there is evidence that only the ones who were able to purchase these pianos were of the middle class, and they were the ones that were given the piano lessons. And so there are other references too. Again, I'm just trying to watch how I'm saying this. I don't want to turn anyone off, but I feel like at the same time, by not saying everything that's here, you may go, she's leaving out a lot of things. I am, because you can read for yourself. It really is not a secret of what was going on in the United States during the times that pianos and piano lessons were coming about. But let's get down here to, let's see, where do I want to go? Let's just go ahead and go over to ragtime songs. So getting back to that word syncopation, it's saying that in the 1890s, songwriters began more and more often to use syncopation. And there were certain songs associated with that. So you can read about that history too. And so that's when you also start to see like a lot of music was being published. And then there's that part of the history of how do you sell these songs. So ragtime was sometimes associated with certain songs that were put up by certain publishers. And then you had some pioneer ragtime pianists that were coming along as well. And then you have instrumental rags. So the scholar that wrote this book, she definitely puts everything into the writing of the ragtime era, everything. So you can start to read a lot about what was going on in the United States, a lot about what was going on in the different communities. It is not just focusing just on the music, but since we are trying to stay with the topic of piano, let's go on now to talk about someone we can't avoid talking about, and that is Scott Joplin. So he was considered the king of ragtime, and what it says here, it was an earned title. And I did read somewhere where Scott Joplin had hoped that his music would have been taken as seriously as classical music, as art music. But again, it goes back to what my old professor was saying. Well, how was the music used? So if you did a chart and you did side-by-side comparisons of how music was used in Western art music versus ragtime music, you might come up with a very interesting list of uses. And so Scott Joplin's compositions were also called classic ragtime by some scholars because it fused. It was like fusion. It infused a lot of elements from art music, as well as some of the elements that were emerging in the music of the time, where people were just expressing themselves how they felt. And so the techniques and the forms, a lot of it, I'm sure, were borrowed from art music. Also, the form, if you look at the overall structure of a piano rag, it says the form of the piano rag was multi-sectional. So there are several sections of music, generally consisting of 16 measures each and called strains or themes. And then you could label some of the forms as A, as B, as A, as C, A, B, A, C, B, A, B, C, D, A, B, A, C, D. It's just giving you some ways to label it. But what's more important is that you understand the signature sound of ragtime. And so it says the most significant element of ragtime, of course, was syncopation. So the syncopated patterns might be simple ones, written as an eighth to a quarter to an eighth, or a quarter to a half note to a quarter note. And then we can see some other examples as we look back. But here on the C Major Radio Show, we don't get that complex when it comes to talking about rhythms. We say that for the C Major Radio Show. And while it's on my mind again, let me go ahead and say something about the C Major Radio Show. And then we're going to go back over to my piano so I can talk to you about the syncopation improv that I promised. So, what's coming up on the C Major Radio Show? We're going to be talking a little bit later this evening at 7 o'clock, if you can tune in. We're going to talk about intervals. We're talking about the grouping of notes within a bar. We're talking about performance directions, one of my favorite things to talk about, the terms and the signs. So while you're learning about syncopation today, tune in for more terms and signs. And some of my students are learning this as we speak because they need to understand what does andante mean versus moderato versus allegro versus adagio in their case. And so tune in later on tonight. We invite you to tune in for that. Now let's go back over to syncopation improv. Let's go to the piano. So what's happening here? Occasionally, performing rhythms a bit earlier than expected, which is syncopation, creates a swing feeling that is characteristic of, and it says here, the jazz or blues styles. So we have an example here, and you can improv on this. I'm not going to improv today, but I'm just going to play the right hand part. Okay, there's a little bit of an asterisk here that's just saying the first time, play as written, no improv. The second time, anticipate, play earlier than written, and accent the notes indicated by the asterisk. Okay, so I'm going to accent those notes. So the notes that are going to be accented, and I'm in 4/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to accent, count 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do that. And so I think that's what they meant, like try to jump on that fourth count. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. So that added a little bit of an element of surprise because I did that. And that really is, I think, what they're talking about with the improv. Now, what's going on with the left hand? Okay. I think I have to play both hands together just to get more of a sense of what they're talking about, but it's under the heading of developing rhythmic freedom through syncopation improv. And then there's also something called syncopated seventh chords. So I am not the expert when it comes to ragtime, but I thought it was important to talk about it because it's something that keeps coming across my mind and keeps coming across my desk. So if you are interested in talking about ragtime, go ahead and start reading about the composers of piano rags. Just a little bit of history about Scott Joplin. His dates are 1868 through 1917, and he was born in Texarkana, Texas. So as a child, he studied music with a local German music teacher. He left home at an early age and began playing professionally in about 1884. In the next year, he went to St. Louis, Missouri, and it was there that he first won recognition for his rag piano skills. 10 years later, he settled at Sedalia, Missouri, and during the next decade took an active role in the musical life of the city. He conducted a music studio, played cornet in the Queen City Concert Band, and attended the George Smith College, where he studied theory and composition. During this period, he also toured with a vocal group he organized called the Texas Medley Quartet. Joplin first published some of his compositions in 1895, 2 songs and 3 piano pieces. But they gave scant evidence of the originality that would appear in later pieces. In 1899, he published his first rag pieces. The previous year, he had offered several compositions to publisher Carl Hoffman of Kansas City. Original Rags was accepted, and the Maple Leaf Rag was rejected. The latter became very popular. However, for Joplin played it constantly. Finally, in the summer of 1899, Joplin found a publisher, John Stark, for his Maple Leaf Rag. Stark was able to publish most of Joplin's music for the next 10 years. The Maple Leaf Rag brought unprecedented success, commercially and artistically, to both composer and publisher. This piece sold more than 1 million copies and is still popular today. Most important, it established a model for classic ragtime that was emulated by all rag composers interested in serious composition. The Maple Leaf Rag became a test piece for pianists. It ushered in a new order for showy, virtuoso instrumental pieces that demanded technical brilliance. Concert artists had available to them works written in a new American musical language that matched the dances and character pieces of the great romantic composers of Europe. To quote one music historian, the Maple Leaf Rag became an American institution. And another observed, Joplin's piano rags can only be described as elegant, varied, often subtle, and sharply incised as a cameo. They are the precise American equivalent in terms of a native style of dance music, of minuets by Mozart, mazurkas by Chopin, or waltzes by Brahms. And then you have an example of the Maple Leaf Rag here. So as I'm reading from this book, it goes on to say how many other rags were published by Scott Joplin. I'll read just a little bit here and then I'll stop with the part where he settled in New York. And then I'll talk a little bit about Treemonisha, just saying maybe a sentence or two, and then I'll stop there. So it says, Joplin wrote many other rags, of which the best known were The Entertainer, featured in the film The Sting in 1974. Now, let me just comment on this. Have you seen the movie The Sting? It is amazing. You have to see that movie. I believe it stars Paul Newman and Robert Redford. And then there's another bad guy in the movie that's really very memorable, his character. And I love the music in the movie The Sting. I thought they really did the ragtime music justice in that film. So if you have a chance to, go to your local library and rent that movie. And of course, music is never without controversy. I also read that there were some people that took flack for the way that the ragtime was presented. So getting back to Scott Joplin, he wrote many other rags, which is best known in the film The Sting, because you hear The Entertainer. Other rags would be Euphonic Sounds, Magnetic Rag, Sunflower Slow Drag, and Wall Street Rag. But he also turned his attention immediately to works in larger forms. In 1899, he completed a folk ballet called The Ragtime Dance, which received a single performance in Sedalia's Woods Opera House. By 1903, he had written a rag opera entitled A Guest of Honor, but the score now is lost. A staged one performance of it with his Scott Joplin Drama Company. Although Joplin failed to find a publisher for the score, he was apparently undaunted, for he began work soon thereafter on a second opera, Treemonisha, which he completed in 1905. In 1907, Joplin settled at New York. Musically active in several ways, he conducted a music studio, made piano roll recordings, published a large quantity of his music, including a manual, The School of Ragtime, 6 exercises for piano, which was published in 1908, and even founded his own publishing company. He also toured on the vaudeville circuit. Most of all, he invested his energy in trying to produce his opera. Finally, in May 1911, he published a 230-page manuscript himself, and in 1915, despairing of ever finding a producer, he staged the opera himself in a nondescript hall in Harlem, without benefit of scenery, costumes, or orchestra. Predictably, the production was a failure. Joplin's young friend, ragtimer Sam Patterson, attended the performance. Without scenery, costumes, lighting, or orchestral backing, the drama seemed thin and unconvincing. Little better than a rehearsal, and its special quality, in any event, would surely have been lost on the typical Harlem audience that attended. Sophisticated enough to reject their folk past, but not sufficiently so to relish a return to it. Treemonisha was given its world premiere in 1972, some 67 years after Joplin completed it. And then it goes on to talk more about Treemonisha. Now, if you start turning the page, of course, you're going to run into ragtime players that develop their own style. So you can't talk about ragtime without talking about Jelly Roll Morton, without talking about U.B. Blake, James Hubert, U.B. Blake. And I remember seeing television programs about U.B. Blake and just seeing his fingers go across the keys and learning about when he started playing professionally, and learning about his notable achievements. Noble Sissel. I mean, the list just goes on. And this is just in one book that's labeling ragtime performers, ragtime pianists. And I'm sure there are many more that didn't make this list that can be mentioned in the same breath as the names that I've mentioned so far. So if you are interested in ragtime, I would say explore it. I would say start to look into it. I'm looking into it. I consider myself a lifelong learner of music. As much as I love to teach music, I also like to learn about music. Music takes a lifetime to learn. I was just talking about this with one of my students. And if you start to think about that way, you think about it in that way, you won't limit yourself to just learning maybe one song, maybe learning a handful of songs, that you will devote your time and your attention to just learning about where music can take you. So don't rule out the possibility of enriching your life with music making. It doesn't stop with a favorite tune. It doesn't stop with writing a handful of tunes. It doesn't stop with a handful of keys, so to speak. And I just encourage you to make the best music that you can make. You might surprise yourself. One of the sad things that I see sometimes over and over again is this competition between musicians, that they try to outdo one another. And to be honest, if I keep reading in this history book, you will hear about some of the battles that went on between musicians. So it can be a fun, competitive thing, but if it becomes something that really stresses you out, that you can't do what you're seeing on a video nowadays, watching a video trying to mimic everything that you see, that you can't do what you see somebody do in person. One of the other heartbreaking things I get sometimes with people that watch me play, they go, "Oh, well, you played that passage so fast. If I just do that, if I could just learn to do that." Well, I just did it without even really thinking about it. But a lot of being able to do that has to do with following technique, following a method, following the correct pedagogy, so that you can play with ease and play without even thinking about it. And then if you aren't into that, then I would encourage you to go ahead and find your own style. There's still room for that. There's so much room for so much music to be made. And so before I end today's broadcast, let me go back to what I was saying in the beginning, that you often tap your feet in time when you're listening to a piece of music, especially if it is marching music or dancing music. And you may find yourself tapping to the steady beats of music. And you hear me talk a lot about on this show. I talk about letter names of notes. I talk about chords. I talk a lot about self-teaching. But the main thing I want you to remember is that music, by definition, is organized sound. Music is made out of fixed sounds, like those produced by the keys on a keyboard, which is what we talk about here on this podcast. I am CMajor, and I have something to say about making music. So I invite you to tune in every Saturday morning right here on CMajor before the show. Today, we talked about the emergence of ragtime music. I was very careful in how I was talking about it. I wanted to introduce you to the idea of learning something about that part of music history. And I invite you to download on demand some of our other episodes. You may have heard about the Halloween episode, and in case you missed it, everything that you hear is available for download on demand. I also invite you to tune in because I'm putting together a very special series that's dedicated to coffee culture. Not just coffee, but coffee culture. Who are these people that are listening to music as they drink coffee? And what music is being played? What are you hearing side by side? Those are the things that we'll talk about. We'll talk about that on our short series. So start planning now. Have your favorite holiday drink in hand, your favorite coffee bar drink in hand when the time comes. And I will make a special announcement about that. Also, we invite you to be here on CMajor before the show because we like to share piano lessons. We like to share stories. We like to share music tips. We like to share more than that. And I did say I was going to give a very special shout out today. So get ready, get ready, get ready. Applause. And cheers. We wanted to say a very special thank you to Fairy Sprinkles for your thumbs up. Thank you so much for listening to CMajor before the show. It means a lot for you to tune in and to give us your feedback about what you're hearing. So thank you all for listening. I will see you again soon and have a great day. Take a little time to make music. Make the best music you can make. And I'll see you soon.